Hello and welcome back to another segment of License to Legacy. This is part two of our Goldfinger conversation. I'm Javi Trujillo, and joining me once again is Mr. David Leigh. How are you today, David?
I am very well, thank you, Javier.
And Mr. Bill Koenig. How are you, Bill?
I'm doing fine.
Well, let's dive right into this. There has been an explosion of Goldfinger merch this fall. Have you been tempted to get any? And has anything from the film, be it the clothes, the toys, etc., been an influence on you or an essential part of your fandom? David, let's start off with you.
Okay, well, I have got on this shelf just behind me a Corgi Aston Martin DB5, which I bought when I was about 8 years old. I think there are three things that happened at around the same time within the space of a few months that cemented my fandom. And one of them was buying the DB5. One of them was seeing The Man with the Golden Gun on the big screen. And the other thing was reading Casino Royale, which my dad had in paperback. And I can't remember which order they happened anymore, but they were around the same time. And it was just, that was it. So, yes, I have the Corgi, DB5, like just about everybody else. Has anything else influenced me? I'm not really sure. I did get the chance to drive some Aston Martins once, which is something I always wanted to do. That's not ownership, unfortunately, at the moment. But yeah, I'll leave it at that.
What about you, Bill?
I haven't really been tempted to get anything new. I mean, I know you can get like Connery's golf hat, Connery's golf outfit, things like that. I just haven't been motivated to do that. When I was a kid, my parents got me this one thing, and you put these two things together. If you look down on it from above, it'd be like an X. And so what you would have four backgrounds. So one of the backgrounds was from Goldfinger. You had, and these were very small, you had like Bond on the laser table, you had Odd Job, you had Goldfinger. Then another background was Thunderball, which was, had just come out, and, it had a Disco Volante. And it's like, I always regretted, through the wear and tear of play as a child, and of course, it was destroyed long ago. I kind of wished my parents would have gotten me a second one and put it into storage, but life doesn't work that way. So that's at the end of last segment, talked about how the impact of Goldfinger, and that those toys were definitely an example. And there were other Bond toys too, but Goldfinger was definitely high on. So that was that. Like I said, I wish I still had it. I could put it on a shelf or something.
I remember, I think in the mid to late 90s, I went to a comic shop and they had a very beat up Corgi DB5 in the box. Both the box was beat up and the car was chipped, like the paint was chipped. I don't think it had the henchman at all. I think that was missing, although the ejector seat did work. And I eventually gave that to my cousin, Cole. But I also have a print that my fiance got me. It's an art print called Bond Back in Action, and it's featuring the Mustang and the DB5 racing. I've got that framed and mounted on the wall in the office. But in terms of like the new stuff, I definitely want to get the re-release of the DB5 from Corgi. I think they redid the packaging to make it look like it did in 64, and there's a gold edition as well, but I'd rather just have the one in trying to mimic the silver birch. And I've always wanted to get that suit, the Kentucky suit that Connery has, the Glen check or the Prince of Wales check. I'm forgetting that. I'm sure Matt Spazer is listening to this and can correct me. But Mason and Sons offers that, and one of these days I am gonna get that suit just because it's so iconic. And I think we've seen that in other movies like Catch Me If You Can, where Leonardo DiCaprio tries to get that suit, and various people have tried to copy that look. And that's been a big part of my fandom. There was even Big Chief Studios. They've since gone defunct, but they were trying to launch a 1/6 scale Bond figure line. And they started with Goldfinger, and Connery's in that suit, and they had Odd Job and Goldfinger, and then they did Live and Let Die with Roger Moore, and I want to say Solitaire and not Mr. Big, Jeffrey Holder. What was his character's name?
Baron Samedi.
Baron Samedi. Thank you.
Samedi.
Couldn't believe I couldn't remember that. And they were supposed to do other figures. I think they got into Dr. No before they went under, but there's definitely been a lot of Goldfinger merch. And I think we got like a new pair of like homage shoes from Crockett and Jones. I think Orla Bar Brown is launching something in a matter of days of this recording. So by the time this goes out, I think it'll already have been announced. Have either of you ever tried to imitate Bond's watch from the movie? Either a Rolex looking watch or the NATO strap?
Actually, the NATO strap, yes. Well, I'll tell you a funny story about Rolex, though. When I was a kid, my dad had a Rolex, and it wasn't a Submariner, but he had a Rolex. He never used to use it because he said it didn't work properly. And the story was that he'd lent somebody some money. This guy hadn't been able to pay him back, so he gave him his watch. And I was just going through my dad's stuff that was just, in my parents' bedroom, and it was just loose. It's not like I was really going through all his private stuff. And I saw it was a Rolex, and because of the books, I knew that Bond wore Rolex. And so when I was about 10, I used to go playing James Bond wearing a Rolex.
Wow, that is something.
So yeah, so there's that. But I don't remember who did it. It must have been about 15 years ago. There was a company in the States, and they made the Goldfinger NATO. It's not actually a NATO band, but I think the NATO specification was actually much later than
right. Yeah,
Goldfinger. But the nylon strap, or the tricolor strap, like in Goldfinger, and they were very, very expensive at the time, I seem to remember. But and I bought a couple of those, and so I used to wear my watch on that, which it used to make me kind of smile, because having a bit of Bond every day when I just got up and put my watch on.
There's what color was your strap? Was it the correct green?
Yeah,
and
it was
blue?
the green, red, and is it dark blue or something? I can't remember exactly now. Yeah, it was correct.
Yeah, Legend.
Unlike Daniel Craig's.
Yeah, that the poor quality of VHS and people's TVs calibration.
Yeah,
a lot of people thought it was black and gray.
It's funny because I remember following all this years ago, and people weren't sure whether it was 2 colors or 3 colors, because they were thinking it was some kind of chromatic distortion from watching it on DVD. And it wasn't until I think people first started to watch it on Blu-ray that it even then there was some argument about whether it was real or not, and then it was watching it on the big screen on film, and then people decided yes, the 3 colors are real.
But that led to the Spectre NATO of black and gray. So now, if you had it wrong before 2015, now it is correct. It is a Bond colored strap.
But I remember watching a TV interview with Daniel Craig, and I think it must have been at the time of Skyfall, or maybe it was Spectre. But he was saying that he wore a Rolex, and he was saying that he wore it on the Rolex. He wore his Rolex and Rolex Submariner on a strap like the one in Goldfinger, but he had the 2 color strap on that. And so I think that the reason in Spectre that they had the gray and, is it gray and black?
Gray and black, yeah.
Yeah. The reason it was gray and black was because Daniel Craig said, look, I've got the Goldfinger strap and I want to wear that in Spectre. So I think that's all down to Daniel Craig.
He's definitely been influential when it comes to Bond's watches. Bill, do you have any affinity for the Goldfinger watch?
Well, not especially the Goldfinger watch, but I do wear a Rolex, which I won in a motorsports writing competition. And I worked at the Indianapolis Star at the time, and I did this explanatory story about, how Formula One is different from Indy cars, because Indianapolis was going to host the U.S. Grand Prix for a few years, starting in 2000. And I just, I entered the contest not expecting anything, and then I got a call. I had won, so I still wear it. It stops usually once a day, and I have to get it going again.
I want a Rolex. Is it a Submariner? No, I don't want it.
Yeah. It's, what does it say? It's Oyster something.
Oyster Perpetual?
Yes, that's it. Yeah, it's a low-end Rolex. It's just stainless steel, no precious metals, but no, but I haven't sought out watches because they're in movies or anything. This Rolex does me fine. Like I said, it's been 25 years and I'm still wearing it.
I've always been captivated by the GoldenEye Omega, whatever the correct pronunciation is. And I had a cheap diver's watch that looked like it. It even had the waves on it. And I eventually put it on a black and gray NATO. But my son, when I bought him a Casio, not an automatic, just a quartz, and got him a NATO strap, he picked the Goldfinger colored one. So watching it now, it's like, oh, that strap is so tiny and you can see the lugs and or some of the bar. It's like, it should be just a little bit. The strap should be just a little bit wider.
It's too narrow for the watch. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it always throws me off when he does that close up right before the detonation. In the
I didn't go that far. When I bought my straps, I made sure that they actually fitted the watch properly.
No. And for my Omega, I've got a gray and blue strap because I have a blue Seamaster. So I probably wouldn't have that strap if it wasn't for the influence of Daniel Craig, who got his influence from Goldfinger. So the DB5. Let's talk about the DB5. So, David, I think you've said many times that you're tired of seeing it in current Bond movies.
Yeah, well, this goes back to what we were speaking about in the last episode about the Goldfinger formula. And that is the one element of the Goldfinger formula which is way overdone. It's, in the books, Bond was a Bentley man, but,
Right.
there were two or possibly three Bentleys because his first car got written off and he bought it's probably Ian Fleming screwed up the details, and so probably it was actually meant to be two cars, but it ends up actually being three. But but he didn't take his Bentley everywhere. He did take it some places, but in the States he would he would either go along with Felix Leiter in his Studebaker. No, in his
Studilac,
yes, exactly. Thank you, Bill. Or he would rent a car, or he would borrow a car. And for example, in Doctor No, he borrows. Well, not exactly borrows because by that stage Strangways is dead. But I think he also probably borrows Strangway's car in Live and Let Die as well. There's not this obsession about having Bond's car. We're in different times, and people. There are many more cars on the road, so you've got to expect a certain change. But going back to Aston Martin for time and time again is a bit too much, and especially going back to the DB5 because it was. I've never driven one. That's not one of the Aston Martins I've driven, but apparently they were a pig to drive, and they may have been high performance by the standards of the day, but these days they're not particularly fast. There's no way that Bond could have been racing Xenia Onatopp in the on the winding roads above Monte Carlo in her Ferrari. Absolutely no way. I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have managed to keep it on the road. So,
well, I mean, they crashed.
Well, and
They crashed in real life. When they make that hairpin turn,
yes,
the camera cuts right before they crash into each other.
and
right, yeah, because Michael G. Wilson is even talking about that crash in the commentary track
Yeah.
that accompanies that scene. I was going to say also, I mean, recently when No Time to Die was being filmed, I would refer to the DB5 as a replica because
yes,
it's got the one you see in the movie. It's got a BMW engine. It's got a carbon fiber body. It's got all these other changes to the suspension. And it's like some of my readers didn't care for me calling it a replica, but it's a replica. It's not, it's not a vintage DB5, which it's supposed to be.
yeah. I think if they'd used real DB5s, the budget of the film would have been even higher.
Yeah, and I'm glad they made replicas because driving a vintage DB5 would be incredibly unsafe.
Yes.
Anyway, I may get into this if I can get this one guest for a future episode. But so in 1983, there was this TV movie, The Return of the Man from U.N.C.L.E., and George Lazenby is driving a DB5. It was a
JB?
vintage as JB. Well, anyway, the car he was driving was owned by someone on the crew. And at the time, I was on this James Bond trivia thing. It was a Zoom call thing, and various of us were asking questions of participants. Anyway, when we were waiting to start, he talked about that DB5. He said, the transmission fell out of it at one point. And at that, at the time that was filmed, okay, it's less than 20 years old. So okay. So with No Time to Die, the car's supposed to be 60 years old or almost. I mean, just no way. And it's with the passage of time, I just,
Bill. That I've got to say though, if you recall the state of the Aston Martin in Q's workshop, even if it started off as an original DB5, by the time it had been rebuilt, it was a replica anyway.
Right.
Yeah. It was just the steering wheel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Bill, do you think that the DB5 should come back for Bond 26 or keep Aston Martin as the provider of Bond's vehicle? Or is it time to move on to another brand, maybe go back to Bentley?
Ford Mondeo.
I think it's time to move on from the DB5. Can still be an Aston Martin. I'm not so... Another Aston Martin would be fine, but, I think one of the smart decisions of the Roger Moore films was going with the Lotus.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. I'm not necessarily Lotus, but something like that.
Right, because, so Roger Moore got his own car instead of living off of Goldfinger. Yeah, and you could... And then, of course, with Timothy Dalton, they went back to Aston Martin, but it was a then new Aston Martin. It wasn't the DB5. And, so if they wanted to use a newer Aston Martin, I'd be fine with that. But just something, the idea of something that's supposed to be a 60-year-old car, it's time to give it a rest.
Casino Royale, to me, had it half right. Like, they acknowledged the heritage with him winning the DB5, but then, he got his own DBS, which... he trashed in the next film.
Yeah.
Well, in that movie and the next one. Yeah.
I think you're right there. Where they got it wrong was Skyfall, where suddenly the Aston Martin in the lockup was right-hand drive, and it's got the gadgets, and it's like, come on.
There were a lot of modifications between films that we did not see.
Yeah.
But as much as I love the DB5, and I've loved seeing it come back in the Brosnan era and in the Craig era, I think we really need to move forward. And between
don't get me wrong, I love it. I love it when I love it in Goldfinger. I love seeing it in Thunderball. Yeah, okay, in the Brosnan era, but now it's just again and again and again, and it's just too much.
And I mean, outside of having the Bollinger, like the DB5 in GoldenEye didn't really have any gadgets. Like, it felt like it was a decommissioned car that he got to keep, which I kind of liked.
Yeah, I think the only gadget, if you want to call it that, he had a way of sending photos to headquarters. He'd send a
Right, in
photo.
the Alpine
Yeah,
CD player.
yeah,
yeah.
but
Was
again,
was it a fax or I can't remember.
I think it was a fax. I
It
mean,
was a
Yeah.
fax.
It was 95, so
Yeah, probably was a fax.
But probably our listeners are old enough to remember what faxes are or were.
But with, the boundaries that Aston Martin is starting to push again with manufacturing, they've got the Vanquish coming back. The DB12, I think, looks really nice. And now with Adrian Newey coming on, like, there's an opportunity to get something new. I mean, we saw the Valhalla briefly in the background of No Time to Die, but I would like to see them continue the Aston Martin tradition. It's time for something
Yeah,
new to
I'm
match our
not a
new
fan
Bond.
of those hypercars. It's that's not something I can see Bond in. I'm glad that it didn't have a bigger part in No Time to Die in the end.
And if it's not, an Aston, I wouldn't mind going back to a modern Bentley, like Jeffrey Deaver did in his brief book. I mean, that's a whole other conversation of what happened with the continuation novels being set in the present day. But I thought that was a nice touch to go back to Bentley for that. There's another vehicle though in Goldfinger. And Bill, you've covered the auto trade considerably in your career. What impact did debuting the Ford Mustang have on the vehicle's longevity? Because that also is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year.
That's right. Well, I know there was a Ford executive named Joe Heinrichs. He since left the company, and now he's CEO of CSX, a railroad company. But I remember a couple times he made a point of saying, Mustang made its debut in Goldfinger. So he was rather proud of it. So, and it's funny, there was this movie a few years ago called Ford versus Ferrari about the Le Mans race.
Or
And
Le
there's
Mans
this
66
Yeah, I
internationally.
think that's right. Yeah. And there's this scene of Ford executives talking and Bond comes up. Now it's funny because I think there are some mistakes in the scene because
chronologically.
Well, chronologically also Henry Ford is described as calling the Bond movies, he's not happy with them. And it's like
degenerate, I think, is the word tossed out.
Yeah. But it's like with Goldfinger and Thunderball, those two movies, especially Ford, kissed the Bond ring and, went for it. It had all sorts of cars and trucks in both movies.
I do prefer Fiona's blue Mustang to Masterson's. Was it like a canary yellow in Goldfinger?
It's a very light colored car.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And of course, they had to do it in, when the thing from Bond's wheel comes out. I mean, that's like a fiberglass mock-up of a Mustang where it's actually, cutting the tires and cutting the body and then cutting the other tire. But yeah, I mean, Ford was, that was a big deal. And one of the people who championed the Mustang, there were a lot of Ford executives who claimed to have championed the Mustang, but one who did of note was Leigh Iacocca, who was an executive at Ford at that time. And that helped make his reputation at Ford until Henry Ford II got tired of him and gave him the boot years later. But yeah, I think it's fair to say that being in Goldfinger helped the popularity of that model. And it originally wasn't a muscle car; it became a muscle car.
Yeah. You can actually see the development of it in the Bond films, because by the time of
Diamonds
Are Forever, it's a very different car.
Yeah,
the Mach 1. Yeah. When Connery finally gets behind the wheel, it is substantially different looking. It looks wider and heavier. I'm not sure on the actual specs, but it just, compared to the ones we saw earlier, it just looks like it'd be a heavier car.
The original Mustang was like a Falcon with a few tweaks. Not about few, but with tweaks. Oh, there's this one racing guy, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, but he did some work for Ford, and he referred to the original as a secretary's car. And then he was involved in making it more of a muscle car.
Okay, so it was the automobile equivalent of the Beretta, then.
I guess so.
I mean, it is notable that, 3 of the 6 Connery Eon movies have a Mustang in it. But I think what really pushed it out there also is Steve McQueen and Bullitt and the car chase in San Francisco.
That's right. And that was when the car was starting to change from the original.
Yeah.
It's probably not quite as much of a muscle car as it was in Diamonds, but it's definitely a little more.
Switching gears, no pun intended.
Hmm.
We get our second Felix in Goldfinger, even though it's the third movie. Is this what established the template of having a different Felix?
Well, it did, but quite by accident, or not. That wasn't the plan going in, because Jack Lord was asked to come back and play Felix. That did not come out until 1983. Starlog magazine published a feature story about Richard Maybaum, and Maybaum blew the whistle on that.
Okay.
They wanted to have Jack Lord back, but Jack Lord wanted a big raise, and he wanted an improvement in billing. Maybe it would have, if Jack had his way, it might have been Sean Connery and Jack Lord playing Goldfinger. But anyway, they told him thanks, but no thanks. And so then Cease Linder got the part. And then that then became sort of a tradition for a while. You'd have a different Felix every movie. But it's funny. I've heard people say, I don't know why they got that old Cease Linder. And I tell them, Cease Linder was actually 3 months younger than Jack Lord. Just, Jack Lord played younger.
Yeah.
And Cease Linder looked older. But no, they were born 3 months apart.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of them, David?
Oh, I think Jack Lord was the lighter to beat. And I think for me, everyone who came after that playing lighter didn't really match up to him. So quite forgettable, I think, really.
I mean, this one and the one in Diamonds Are Forever are probably my least favorite Felixes, which, they both had Guy Hamilton directing them as a common thread. But in this post like Jeffrey Wright world, do you think we're done with the rotating Felix casting?
I hope so. It does make more sense to bring back the same actor, but we'll see. At the moment, we need to see we need to see what they do with Bond. So I don't really care if Leiter comes back for a film or two anyway. Although I do have to say that I hope he does come back at some stage, because I do like Leiter.
Like I said, it was just a different deal, because then the next time you see Felix, it's Rick Van Nutter, and he's a lot different looking. It's just after a while they really didn't seem to care about as long as we can afford him.
Well, a lot of times too they fell into that trap of like, oh, let's trying to recapture what they did in Dr. No, where you don't know if that person watching Bond is like a friend or foe. And because we don't, at least at the time, like we didn't know like, oh, this is the person playing Felix. At least I didn't as a kid. You see that character watching Bond and they look a little shady and you think maybe it's an opponent. And then you find out, oh, it's Felix, like in The Living Daylights.
Yeah. It's but maybe it's part of their strategy. It's deliberate to keep you guessing.
And nowadays, with everyone being so pop culture savvy and the internet, like it's really hard to pull over those things. I mean, even with, I don't want to say stunt casting, but like with Naomi Harris's Eve, oh, this is Eve and she's the Bond girl, and then you watch the movie and she's Moneypenny. It's like, okay, like those kind of surprises don't really pay off in today's landscape, I don't feel. Be it, Oberhauser, or in Star Trek, they had Benedict Cumberbatch be
Khan.
Yeah, they tried to say he was like Harrison or something, and then you find out his name is really Khan, and like it just don't. Please stop.
Did you turn out to be Kirk's brother though?
No. Thankfully not. Not even a stepbrother. What is a line you quote from Goldfinger the most often? Or if you don't quote it, what's like one of your favorite memorable lines?
I must be dreaming.
Shocking, absolutely shocking was a good way to end the pre-title sequence.
Yeah,
I feel like I say that one a lot. I mean, everyone I think primarily goes to, "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die," but I don't really say that a lot in conversation. But, you can slip in a shocking and, you know, no one's the wiser, but, you've got that little Bond moment to yourself.
I may have misquoted. Is it shocking, positively shocking?
Positively shocking.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. Which makes, scientific sense, positive, negative, electricity.
Any other favorite lines from the film?
Well, somebody bought me for my one of my recent birthdays the official Bond doormat, and it quotes directly from the film. It's I've been expecting you, Mr. Bond.
I cited this earlier, but when Bond is talking to Goldfinger, and finally Bond knows what's really going to happen, and that business about if authorities try to locate the bomb, risk is all on your side, and not so much any single line, but just that scene. And then at one point, Gert Frobe has this look on his face as he sees Bond is finally putting it together. And, it's like, of course, his government's giving you a bomb. I prefer to call it an atomic device. It's small, but particularly dirty. I mean, that whole scene has some nice lines. No one killer line, but it's just a very nice scene.
Nice. One of the things that came out this year from La La Land was a 60th anniversary CD release. And there's liner notes in there that say, for John Barry, the success of Goldfinger, the song, the score, the movie, launched a new chapter of international success with multiple film offers and eventually 5 Academy Awards. And as he concluded some 36 years after his experience, quote, in Goldfinger, everything came together, musically and also in terms of design. Goldfinger defined the mood and style for the entire series, end quote. Do we measure a Bond score today by the work that John Barry did in this film? What do you think, David?
I think until recently, yes, but I think since Skyfall, with Thomas Newman, and then with the Hans Zimmer factory, they've moved away from that, because I think David Arnold was doing a good job, not trying to copy exactly what John Barry was doing, but certainly being influenced by him, and he created his own Bond sound. But I think the soundtracks for the recent Bond films have been very, very disappointing. The last really good one was Quantum of Solace, which I think actually is perhaps David Arnold's best. I don't know if I actually answered your question there, but that's what I've got to say.
Well, also there was this anecdote that was this came up in a 2006 British television special, and when it came to the title song, Harry Saltzman was extremely angry. He thought it was awful.
Mm-hmm.
And supposedly he said to Barry, it's like, we've got these release dates. If I had enough time, I'd just throw it out. I'd throw it out. Then, of course, it becomes this enormous hit. Harry's, having to eat crow a little bit and apologize to Barry. Well, of course, it made, I don't know how much of a star she was before the song, but, definitely made her a big star afterwards. And they brought her back 2 more times, and then she did other movie songs. There was this movie in the 60s called The Liquidator. It was actually based on a John Gardner book, and she did the title song for that. I think Lalo Schifrin did the music.
Wow.
Just call up YouTube, plug in The Liquidator, and see if you can just get the titles. It's definitely a Shirley Bassey song.
I'm going to look into that. That sounds cool.
Yeah, so, it's funny also, though, that John Barry had all these signature songs and scores and couldn't get an Oscar nomination for a long time. He finally got nominated for Born Free, and he won 2 for that. He won for both score and song. But yeah, it's just, for a long time, the Academy, wouldn't. They never did nominate him for a Bond piece of music. It was all his other, it was all his other stuff. It's funny. Harry Saltzman was so annoyed about Goldfinger, but he still hired Barry to do the music for the Ipcris File.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Barry was definitely on his way as a big time movie composer after this film. It's
Well, comparing Goldfinger to From Russia with Love, was there something different or special about Goldfinger that From Russia with Love didn't capture in
well
terms of like what the Bond sound is?
well, Barry was able to incorporate what was his title song into the score, whereupon in From Russia with Love, he's incorporating bits of Lionel Bart's title song. I think just Goldfinger was more of an integrated package because, like say, Barry is doing the music for the song, he's doing the music for the score, and one of my favorite pieces of music from Goldfinger, it's actually one of the quieter ones. I think it's where he's tailing Goldfinger in the Swiss Alps, and it's this very quiet thing, and it incorporates the Goldfinger theme. I like it a lot, and I can't really place my finger on it. But then when he needs to go big, like the Dawn raid on Fort Knox, he goes big. It's like I say, it's an integrated package.
I think the score is it has a bombast that we didn't get him From Russia with Love. And it just kind of changed everything going forward to where even, David Arnold in what he thought might be his only attempt used a lot of Goldfinger or John Barry cues in his score for Tomorrow Never Dies. Like they're woven in. Like the first time I heard like Bond back in action being used in Tomorrow Never Dies when Pierce is driving to the hotel to, find Terry Hatcher. Like that just got me really excited to hear that music again, especially after, GoldenEye and License to Kill, where we had just no John Barry for almost 10 years, like not having that sound. And I think that just really set the tone of what we expect and what a lot of people define as, a good or a bad Bond soundtrack, if it can capture
I
some of the
reckon.
magic here.
I think if you have John Barry on a Bond film, it elevates it by at least 2 points.
Yeah.
Because it gives a whole feeling to the film that you don't get with the other composers. The closest to Barry is David Arnold, and I think he has done very well. But as I said, I think Thomas Newman and Hans Zimmer didn't get anywhere close, despite Hans Zimmer, the Zimmer factory, using some of John Barry's music in No Time to Die, and David Arnold's as well.
Yeah. And while Barry didn't get an Oscar nomination for any of his Bond work, Goldfinger is the first Bond movie to win an Academy Award for Best Effects and Sound Effects. So it did bring home some Oscar gold.
That's right. Norman Wanstall, and his Oscar was presented by Angie Dickinson, and you can see this on YouTube. Like plug in the search engine Goldfinger Best Sound Effects, and it'll all come right up.
We're about to wind down here on our conversation today, but Bill, you wanted to bring up some notes about the Goldfinger script.
Yes. I have this book, it was published in 1998, called Adrian Turner on Goldfinger. Adrian Turner is a British film historian. He researched the movie and various things, and he went to Iowa City, where Richard Maybaum's papers are kept. And he went through the various drafts and memos. Maybaum worked on the early drafts. Paul Dane came in and then rewrote. But Maybaum was kept in the loop. He got to, he was given the chance to comment on the work Dane was doing, which I'm not sure would happen today. One thing, it's now this sort of common joke. Why doesn't he just kill him? It's like, Mike Myers used that to death in his Austin Powers movies. But in real life, both Maybaum and then Dane sweated bullets on that. Why doesn't he just kill him? And trying to come up with a reason why, Goldfinger, keeps Bond around, because they didn't like how it was handled in the book. And, and it was a really tough nut to crack, that book. Maybaum, in his drafts, he kept the gangsters around a lot longer.
Mhm.
The gangsters actually go to Fort Knox, as in the novel, except for one. And then and so it was just very difficult. Dane solved a lot of the problems, but he had one goofy idea, which was, his idea was, at the end you'd have Bond and Pussy in a clinch, and then curtains would come from the side of the screen and close, and then they'd open, and I read that. That's like the goofiest thing I'd ever saw. And apparently Sean Connery thought so too when he had a chance to comment on the script. And that idea, wasn't dropped. One quick note, I think I mentioned this in passing. In the pre-title sequence, that thing, it was a seagull on Connery's head. In the first version, it was a dead dog. But apparently this idea was a Paul Dane idea. And apparently Paul Dane had a intelligence background during World War II. And according to a writer named Jeremy Duns, this stemmed from some operation he was involved with. So he kind of puts it in, he puts it in the movie, and, it gets tweaked, but, it's in the movie. But yeah, boy, it's like writing a Bond movie is a lot harder than it looks. And that was especially true in Goldfinger's, the conclusion I came away with. Dane, it was in Dane's script that the gangsters get killed, kind of getting them out of the way before the climax. Also, real quickly, not too many. Fort Knox is not one of the main destinations for Bond fans, but I have been there. It was over 40 years ago.
Okay.
But I recognize very little of Kentucky is actually in the movie. Most of what's supposed to be Kentucky in the movie is actually Miami. But those shots of where the soldiers are pretending to be poisoned by nerve gas, that was shot at Fort Knox. There's that building that has the sign "Welcome General Ruchan," which was this in-joke because retired Colonel Ruchan was technical advisor to the film. It was still around when I was there. I haven't been there since, so I don't know if it's still there, but that's definitely, the actual fort. But yeah, it's the script was definitely it was definitely not an easy script, and it went through a lot of things. And this also is one quick anecdote related to it. Harry Saltzman had this idea. So when final film version, it was originally Mr. Springer, but it ends up being Mr. Solo in the final film. The original idea was they put his body in a car and they drive the car off the cliff. And Harry's going, no, it's got to be bigger, grander. And so he's talking to Wolf Mankiewicz, who had worked on some of the early drafts of Dr. No. And so Mankiewicz says, I got an idea, Harry, but it'll cost you 500 pounds in cash. And so, all right, what is it? And he came up with the idea of having the gangster killed in the car crusher. Because apparently Mankiewicz had read about this, that this is something the mafia did, and in real life. So he collected 500 pounds and they put it in the movie.
Okay.
Well, with the Golden Girl, Shirley Bassey, Odd Job, and the DB5, is this the most iconic Bond film? Especially considering the impact it had on future 007 Pierce Brosnan, whose own GoldenEye brought Bond to a new generation, complete with its own landmark song and a video game that defined that generation.
I think it is. As I said earlier, the impact was almost immediate in popular culture. Harold Sakata started doing commercials for cough syrup, where he'd get into a coughing jug, he's chopping and causing all sorts of mayhem, and his wife is running, oh, here's the Vicks, I think it was Vicks, coughing medicine, so he stops coughing.
My
and
God.
then the camera pulls back, and it's there's all this destruction.
Yeah, the city street is falling apart.
Yeah. So, but it wasn't just that. It was just, there was already the makings of a spy craze before Goldfinger came out. Goldfinger absolutely accelerated it. By a year later on American television, there were several spy shows on the air on all three commercial networks at the time. And one of them even was CBS. They even arranged to import Danger Man, except they retitled it Secret Agent. But yeah, it's It was an enormous impact, and it's still felt to a degree today.
What do you think, David? Has anything even come close to matching Goldfinger?
In terms of iconography, I think not, because and I think it would be impossible for any other film to do it, because essentially it set the template, and it is always the film that other Bond films are going to be judged by. So no other film has come close.
Well, looking at you right now, I can see your Thunderball poster in the background, and I've got a Thunderball poster framed in my home as well. Like, that's supposed to be that was touted as the biggest Bond of all. Do you feel like
Yeah.
it came close to Goldfinger, or is there just no comparison?
Well, I think for me, I prefer it to Goldfinger. Partly, I think, because I really like the book. I like the plot, and yes, it doesn't have the iconography, but I prefer it as a film, whether or not it's actually a better film.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on this look back on Goldfinger and its 60th anniversary year. Any parting words, Bill, before we get out of here?
Just real quick, it was in the scripting process. It was funny. They start with the DB5, but it didn't have a lot of gadgets. Then the next draft, suddenly the Bentley appears. And then they go back to the DB5. But it wasn't until late in the process that the gadgets, the machine guns and all that stuff, that happened fairly late. So just we talked so much about the cars, I just thought I'd put in that footnote.
Yeah. David, any final words?
I think I have probably said everything that I need to say about Goldfinger.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. You can find Bill at the Spy Command and David Leigh at the James Bond Dossier. I'm Javi Trujillo, and that has been this episode of the 007 Files. Thank you for listening.
Thanks.
Take care.